There is a special kind of loneliness that comes from losing someone who is still alive. For Mara and June, two sisters in their 50s, 7 years had passed without a single word exchanged between them. Then came a letter about an old mountain cabin no one wanted. The place was on the verge of collapse. The lawyer had said it wasn't worth the gas to even look at it. But it was theirs. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to try one more time. They drove up together in silence. On the second day, while prying up rotten floorboards, they found something impossible. A hidden room, sealed for decades, filled with chests of gold coins and journals that told a story their family had never shared. What had been buried here all this time? Before we go on, tell us where you're listening from. And if this story moves you, be sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I have something very special in store for you. The gravel road to Uncle Teddy's cabin snaked through hemlock and white pine trees so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. Mara Delaney nursed her old Honda Civic along, feeling every pothole in the worn-out suspension. In the passenger seat, her younger sister, June, stared out the window, a hand pressed against the glass like a child might. Neither of them had spoken since they'd turned off the main highway 40 minutes ago. Mara was 58, though some mornings she felt closer to 80. Her hands on the steering wheel were the hands of a woman who'd spent decades washing dishes, changing diapers, and helping elderly parents out of beds and chairs. She still wore a thin gold band on her left hand, though Tom had been gone 2 years now. His life insurance had barely covered the funeral and his medical bills. Their 3 grown children were scattered across 2 states, living their own complicated lives. She'd raised them in a cramped rental in Morgantown, West Virginia, working whatever job came along: grocery store clerk, school cafeteria aide, home health worker. The kind of work that paid just enough to keep you poor, but never completely broke. June was 56, and she looked a different kind of old. Where Mara's face showed the weight of responsibility, June's showed the wear and tear of movement. Crow's feet from squinting at horizons, sun damage from years of outdoor work, a certain leanness that came from irregular meals and restless nights. She'd been married twice, divorced twice, and had no children. The last Mara had heard, June was working at a garden center in Asheville, North Carolina, and living in a studio apartment above a tattoo parlor. Before that, it was Colorado, and before that, Oregon, and before that, who could keep track? They had once been close, so close that people in their small Appalachian hometown used to call them the Delaney girls, as if they were one unit instead of 2 separate people. Mara was the older, steadier one, the one who made sure they got to school on time and had something to eat. June was the dreamer, always reading books about faraway places, always plotting her escape from the mountains that surrounded them on all sides. Their mother had died 7 years ago. That's when the silence began. The cabin appeared suddenly as the trees thinned. A low-slung structure of time-weathered logs, with a sagging porch and a roof that bowed in the middle like a sway-backed horse. 2 front windows stared out like tired eyes. The whole place looked exhausted, ready to give up and be reclaimed by the forest. Mara parked the car and killed the engine. The quiet that rushed in felt thick enough to touch. "Well," June said finally, "it's definitely a cabin." "It's a wreck," Mara replied, pulling the keys from the ignition. "I don't know what I expected, but this is worse." They sat there for another moment, not moving to get out. Somewhere in the woods a bird called out, a long, mournful note that seemed to capture the mood perfectly. "When was the last time you saw Uncle Teddy?" June asked. Mara had to think. maybe 15 years ago. He came to Dad's funeral, stood in the back, didn't talk to anyone, left before the reception. I remember that, June said softly. I tried to talk to him. He just clapped me on the shoulder and said he had to get back to the mountain. He was always strange. Or maybe he was just lonely. There it was. The difference between them in a single exchange. Mara saw strangeness where June saw loneliness. Mara saw a choice for isolation where June saw a wound that never healed. They got out of the car into air that smelled of pine sap, old leaves, and something else. Something like time itself had a scent up here in the mountains. The porch steps groaned under their weight. The front door was locked, but the lawyer had mailed Mara a key, a simple brass key that looked like it had been cut 50 years ago. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold and smelled of dust, mouse droppings, and that distinct scent of places where humans once lived, but live no longer. The main room held a wood-burning stove, a threadbare sofa, a table with one chair, and shelves filled with books whose spines were faded to illegibility. No television, no computer. A transistor radio sat on a windowsill, its antenna bent at an angle. He really lived like a hermit, Mara said, running a finger along a shelf and coming away with a thick coat of dust. June was already moving deeper into the cabin, opening doors. 2 small bedrooms, a bathroom with an actual toilet, thank God, and a small, functional kitchen. At the back was a woodshed, and what looked like a cellar entrance. Mara joined her in the kitchen. The sink was old porcelain, stained with rust. A hand pump stood beside it. No running water. There's a well, June said, pointing out the window. Probably a pump on it. They explored in silence, each taking a mental inventory. The bedroom Teddy had used held a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a 3-drawer dresser, and nothing else. No pictures on the walls, no personal items in sight, save for a pair of worn work boots by the bed and a flannel shirt on a hook. The second bedroom was completely empty, not even a bed frame. He really didn't have much, did he? June said quietly. Mara thought of her own house in Morgantown, crammed with 30 years of accumulated life, kids' artwork in boxes, Tom's tools still in the garage, closets full of clothes she'd probably never wear again. Uncle Teddy had whittled his life down to almost nothing. They found themselves back in the main room, standing awkwardly like strangers at a bus stop. I can take the empty room, Mara said. I brought an air mattress. I'll take the couch, June replied. I've slept on worse. Of course you have, Mara thought. June had spent her 20s backpacking through South America and her 30s following the seasonal work circuit from ski resorts to national parks. Even now, in her 50s, she moved like someone who might need to pack up and leave at a moment's notice. So what's the plan? June asked. The lawyer said the place is ours. No debts, no mortgage, taxes paid through the end of the year. We sell it, Mara said flatly. Split whatever we get. Probably won't be much, given the condition. We could fix it up first, get a better price. With what money? And who's going to do the work? June shrugged. We could do some of it ourselves. I've done renovations before. Of course you have. Mara didn't mean for it to sound bitter, but it did. June's expression shuddered, the way it always did when she felt judged. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Forget it. No, say what you mean, Mara. You always used to. The old pattern was reasserting itself so quickly It felt like a script. Mara, the practical one. June, the flighty one. Mara with her responsibilities and burdens. June with her freedom and adventures. The resentment that had built over decades, compressed by 7 years of silence, was in the room with them like a third person. I just think we need to be realistic, Mara said carefully. Neither of us has money to sink into this place. The smart thing is to sell it as is and move on. Move on to what? June shot back. Back to our separate lives? Back to not talking to each other? You chose that just as much as I did, didn't you? Because I seem to recall you being the one who said I was too selfish to care about anyone but myself. There it was. The thing that had ended them 7 years ago, said out loud for the first time since it happened. Mara closed her eyes. She had said it, in the hospital, 2 days before their mother died. June had been talking about taking Mom for one last trip to the ocean, and Mara had snapped. Mom was dying. There was going to be no trip, and June's fantasy was just another way of avoiding the reality of it. The words had come out, hard and final. You're too selfish to care about anyone but yourself. June had walked out of the hospital and hadn't come back. She hadn't come to the funeral. I was tired, Mara said, her voice quiet. I'd been taking care of Mom for 3 years, Dad before that. I was exhausted, and you were talking about a trip to the beach, like she was just going to get better. I was trying to give her something to look forward to, June said, her voice tight. Something besides waiting to die. But you couldn't see that. You could never see past what was practical. Someone had to be practical. Someone had to do the actual work. And you made sure to remind everyone of that, constantly. They were on the verge of another explosion. Another 7 years of silence. And a part of Mara knew this was the moment to stop it. To say something real instead of something defensive. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. June turned away. I'm going to get my things from the car. She walked out, letting the screen door slam behind her. Mara stood alone in the dark cabin, surrounded by the ghost of a man who had lived here for decades without speaking to anyone, and wondered if Uncle Teddy ever had a sister. By sunset, they had both brought in their few belongings. Mara inflated her air mattress in the empty bedroom, while June made up the couch with a sleeping bag she pulled from her pack. They ate granola bars for dinner, neither suggesting they drive back to town for a real meal. Night fell quickly in the mountains. With no electricity, the cabin was plunged into a profound darkness. Mara had brought a battery-powered lantern, and its sharp LED glow cast harsh shadows on the walls. No cell service up here, June said, checking her phone. The lawyer mentioned that, Mara said. Said Teddy didn't even have a phone. How did anyone ever reach him? I guess they didn't. They sat in the main room, the lantern on the floor between them, and listened to the cabin settle around them. Old wood contracting in the cooling air, small animals skittering in the walls, the distant sound of wind in the high pine branches. Do you remember him? June asked. From when we were kids? Mara searched her memory. He came to a few family things when we were really little. He was Dad's older brother. I remember him being quiet. He'd sit on the porch while everyone else was inside, just smoking a pipe and looking at the hills. He gave me a book once, June said. I must have been 8 or 9. It was about mountain climbing, with pictures of the Himalayas. I read it so many times the spine broke. I never knew that. You were probably busy with something else. You were always busy. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact, but it stung anyway. He gave me something too, Mara said, surprising herself. I haven't thought about this in years. I must have been 12. Mom and Dad were fighting about money, and I was sitting outside crying. Uncle Teddy came out and sat next to me, didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out this little carved bird. A chickadee, I think. He said he'd whittled it himself. He said, sometimes when life feels too heavy, it helps to hold something small and perfect. Do you still have it? I don't know. Maybe in a box somewhere. They fell silent again. The lantern flickered slightly, and Mara wondered how long the batteries would last. We should get some sleep, she said finally. Decide what to do in the morning. Yeah, okay. Mara stood, picked up the lantern, and headed for her room. At the doorway, she stopped and looked back. June was already lying on the couch, sleeping bag pulled up to her chin, staring at the ceiling. June. Yeah? Mara wanted to say something, to bridge the distance between them, to undo 7 years of silence with one perfect sentence. But she didn't know what that sentence was. So instead, she just said, "Sleep well, you too." In her sparse room, Mara lay on the air mattress and listened to the mountain night. Somewhere out there, Uncle Teddy had spent decades of nights just like this, alone in the dark, keeping whatever secrets he kept, living the life he'd either chosen or been forced into. She thought of the small, carved bird, of June's book on mountain peaks, of the ways Uncle Teddy had tried to reach out to two girls who must have seemed as distant as the moon. And she thought about the cabin around her, this place that was now hers and June's, and wondered what Uncle Teddy had really left them. A piece of property worth maybe a few $1,000s, or something else entirely. Some kind of test or gift or final statement she was too tired to comprehend tonight. The air mattress was lumpy and unforgiving. She knew sleep wouldn't come easily, but she closed her eyes anyway, willing her racing mind to quiet. Tomorrow, they would begin sorting through Uncle Teddy's things. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of dismantling a life so they could move on with their own. Tomorrow, they would discover that Uncle Teddy had left them something far more complicated than a cabin. In the forest, morning came slowly to the mountain, light filtering through the pines in thin gray shafts, before the sun finally crested the ridge. Mara woke up stiff and sore. The air mattress had deflated overnight, leaving her to sleep mostly on the hard floor. She could hear June moving around in the main room, the clank of the wood stove door, the crackle of kindling catching fire as she coaxed it to life. June was making coffee in an old percolator she'd found in a kitchen cupboard. The smell was wonderful, rich and strong, and somehow perfect for the place. Found propane in the shed, June told her without looking up from the stove. Tanks are about half full. Should last a few days if we're careful. Thanks for starting the fire. June shrugged. Figured we'd both want coffee. They drank it black, sitting at the small, one-chaired table. June took the chair. Mara leaned against the counter and stared out the window at the morning mist, still clinging to the low places between the trees. The silence between them felt less hostile than the night before, more like a truce than a peace. But it was something. So, June said finally, where do we start? I guess we go through his things, see if there's anything worth keeping before we call someone to haul away the rest. They started in Uncle Teddy's bedroom, methodically working their way through the drawers of his dresser. Socks, all of them darned multiple times. Worn thin undershirts, work pants with patches on the knees. Everything was clean but ancient, kept long past the point most people would have thrown it away. He didn't have much, Mara said, folding a flannel shirt that had likely been washed 1,000 times. Maybe he didn't need much. The closet held more of the same. Work clothes, a single heavy winter coat, boots with worn-down soles. On the top shelf, Mara found a wooden box. She carefully lifted it down, feeling its weight, and set it on the bed to open. Inside were papers. Uncle Teddy's discharge documents from the army. He'd served in Korea, which was news to Mara. A birth certificate. Their grandmother's death certificate. A few old photographs with scalloped edges showing people Mara didn't recognize in front of buildings that no longer existed. "Look at this one," June said, picking up a photo of a young man who must have been Uncle Teddy, standing with another man in front of the cabin. They were both smiling, arms slung around each other's shoulders. "He looks happy. I wonder who the other guy is." June flipped the picture over. On the back, in faded pencil, was a scrawled inscription. "Sam and me, 1968. "Sam?" Mara repeated. "Did Dad ever mention anyone named Sam?" "Not that I remember." They set the box aside and moved to the main room. The bookshelf held an eclectic collection. Field guides on birds and trees, old paperback novels with cracked spines, a Bible that looked like it had never been opened, and what appeared to be several simple, leather-bound journals. June took one of the journals and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with a small, neat script. She read aloud. "March 15th, 1985. Saw the first robin today. Spring's coming early this year. Checked the back room. All is secure. I wonder sometimes if I will be the one to see this through, or if it will fall to someone else. The weight does not get lighter with time." "What back room?" Mara asked. June flipped through a few more pages. "He mentions it a lot. Checked the back room. Secured the back room. The back room remains undisturbed." The two of them looked around. The cabin was tiny. A main room, 2 bedrooms, a minuscule bathroom, and a compact kitchen. There was no other room. "Maybe he meant the cellar," Mara suggested. "Let's check." The cellar entrance was outside, around the back of the cabin. Slanted wooden doors set against the foundation, the kind you had to heave upward. June tugged on the rusted handle, and the doors groaned open, revealing stone steps leading down into darkness. Mara shone her phone's flashlight down. It was just a root cellar. Dirt floor, stone walls, empty shelves where vegetables would have been stored. Nothing out of the ordinary. "This isn't it," June said. Back inside, they examined the cabin more closely. Mara paced the perimeter of the main room, testing floorboards, looking for seams or irregularities. June did the same in the bedrooms. "Mara," June called from Uncle Teddy's room. "Come here." June was standing in what had been the closet, now empty of clothes. She pointed to the back wall. "Look at this." The wall was made of vertical planks, like the rest of the cabin's interior. But one section, about 3 feet wide, looked slightly different. The planks were the same age, the same wood, but the grain didn't quite match the pattern on either side. "It's a door," Mara breathed. "It's a door," June agreed. They felt along the edges, searching for a latch or handle. June found it. A small wooden peg set flush with the wall, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. She pulled. The section of wall swung inward on hidden hinges. Behind it was blackness and a smell of old stone and stale air. Mara held up her flashlight. The beam revealed a narrow opening, and beyond it, wooden steps leading down. Jesus, June whispered. Did you know this was here? How would I? I've never been inside this cabin in my life. They stood at the threshold, both suddenly aware that they were about to step into something significant. Whatever Uncle Teddy had hidden, whatever he had spent decades protecting, lay down those steps. We should go down, June said. Should we? Maybe we should call someone first. The lawyer. And say what? That we found a hidden room in a cabin that's legally ours? Come on, Mara. Aren't you even a little bit curious? Curious was an understatement. Mara could feel her heart thumping against her ribs. She felt the same thrill she used to feel when she and June were kids, exploring abandoned buildings or caves in the hills. Before responsibility had settled on her shoulders like a yoke, before she learned to be practical and cautious and afraid. Okay, she said, but carefully. June went first, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. The stairs were solid, hewn from thick timbers and set into stone walls on either side. 12 steps down, and then the floor leveled out. The room was about 8 feet by 10, with walls made of neatly fitted fieldstone. The ceiling was low enough that Mara, at 5'4", could almost touch it. The air was cool and dry, and it smelled of old paper, metal, and time itself. 3 large steamer trunks were pushed against one wall, the kind with brass fittings and leather straps. Against another wall was a shelf holding glass jars, all empty, and a few old lanterns. The floor was packed earth, hard as concrete. June went to the first trunk and fumbled with the latch, but it was locked. There might be keys upstairs, Mara began, but June was already pulling a multi-tool from her pocket. She worked at the lock for less than a minute before something clicked and the latch sprang free. She lifted the lid slowly, as if something might leap out. Instead, the beam of her flashlight caught the gleam of metal. June reached in and pulled out a heavy, clinking cloth sack. She loosened the drawstring and poured some of the contents into her palm. Gold coins, dozens of them catching the light and reflecting it back in warm, buttery glints. "Oh my God," June said. Mara couldn't speak. She watched as June set down the first sack and pulled out another and another. The trunk was full of them, maybe 30 or 40 sacks, each heavy with coins. With trembling hands, Mara opened the second trunk. More sacks, but these made a different sound. She opened one to find silver coins, pocket watches, serving spoons, candlesticks, all tarnished black, but clearly valuable. The third trunk held papers, leather-bound journals older than the ones on the bookshelf upstairs, bundles of letters tied with twine that had grown brittle with age, photographs, dozens of them, showing people and places Mara didn't recognize. "How much do you think this is worth?" June asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I have no idea. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Where did it all come from?" Mara picked up one of the journals from the third trunk and carefully opened it. The handwriting was different from Uncle Teddy's, older, more formal. She read the first entry. June 3rd, 1967. My father has passed, and with him, the last living guardian of the original pact. I am now the sole keeper of what was entrusted to our family in 1938. I have told no one, not even my brothers. This burden is mine alone, until I can determine the right path forward. I have moved everything to the cabin, where it will be safe. 1967, Mara said. That's Uncle Teddy, writing about his father, our great-grandfather. What pact? What was entrusted? Mara flipped through more pages, scanning the entries. A few words jumped out. Refugee families. Safe harbor. The promise we made. Samuel Weiss. I think, Mara said slowly, Uncle Teddy was hiding this for someone else. Maybe for a family that came here before the Second World War. Or during. June was looking through the photographs now, studying faces frozen in time. Young families, children, old men and women. One photo showed a group of men standing together, all in work clothes. She turned it over. On the back, in Uncle Teddy's handwriting, it said, "To the 7 families, 1938. May we keep the faith in each other and those we serve." 7 families, June said, and ours was one of them. They sat on the floor of the hidden room, surrounded by decades of secrets, and tried to process what they had found. Somewhere above them, the morning was brightening into day. Birds sang in the pines. The world went on as it always had. But down here, in this carefully constructed chamber beneath an old cabin, history had been preserved in gold and silver and faded photographs. What do we do? June asked finally. I don't know. This isn't ours, is it? I mean, legally it might be, but morally, we don't even know who it belonged to. These people could all be gone. Their families could be scattered across the world by now. Or they could be looking for this. This could be someone's inheritance, someone's family legacy. June looked at her sister, really looked at her, for maybe the first time in years. You want to try and find them, don't you? I want to understand what this is first, before we decide anything. It was a reasonable position, and Mara agreed. They spent the next hour carefully inventorying what they had found. Mara took pictures of everything with her phone, even though she had no service to send them. June took notes in a small notebook she'd brought, listing every sack of coins, every piece of silver, every journal and bundle of letters. When they finally climbed the stairs back into Uncle Teddy's bedroom, the normal world seemed jarring and too bright. They closed the secret door carefully, making sure the peg was firmly in place. We can't tell anyone about this, June said. Not yet. Not until we know what we're dealing with, right? They spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the mechanical motions of sorting Teddy's remaining belongings. But both of their minds were on what lay beneath the floorboards. They made sandwiches for lunch and didn't taste the food. They put clothes in bags for donation, their hands working automatically while their minds spun with possibilities and implications. By nightfall, they had emptied most of the bedroom and the bathroom. A small pile of things to keep remained: the box of photographs, the journals from the bookshelf, and a few tools that were still in good condition. Everything else would go to charity or the trash. They sat on the porch as the sun went down, watching the light turn the mountains into shades of purple and gold. The air was cooling, and somewhere nearby, an owl was beginning its nightly hunt. This changes everything, doesn't it? June said. Yeah. We can't just sell the cabin now. We have to figure out what Uncle Teddy wanted us to do with all this. Mara thought of the diary entry, the burden, the guardianship, keeping the faith. Uncle Teddy had carried this secret for decades, his entire life shaped by it. And now, he had passed it to them, to both of them, together. Maybe that's exactly what he wanted, Mara said softly. For us to figure it out together. June looked at her, and something in her expression softened. Yeah, maybe so. The owl called again, closer now. Stars began to prick the darkening sky, more stars than Mara had ever seen in the city, where the light pollution washed them out. Here they felt close enough to touch. "We'll start with the diaries tomorrow," Mara said. "Read everything. Try to piece together the whole story." "Okay," June said. "And June, we're in this together. Whatever we decide together." June reached out and squeezed Mara's hand. Just once. Quick and almost shy. Inside the cabin, the hidden room waited in the darkness, guarding its secrets for one more night. But the sisters who were now its keepers were beginning to understand that some inheritances are more than property. Some are puzzles, meant to bring people together, to give them a common purpose when they've forgotten how to be a family. Uncle Teddy, who had lived alone for so long, had found a way to bring his nieces home. The third morning dawned clear and cool, perfect mountain weather. Mara woke before sunrise and lay on her half-deflated air mattress, listening to the sounds of the cabin. The settling of the wood, June's soft breathing in the main room, a woodpecker hammering somewhere in the distance. Everything felt different now. The cabin wasn't just a burden to be discarded. It was a mystery to be solved. She found June already awake, sitting at the table with one of the leather-bound diaries open before her, a steaming mug of coffee at her side. Morning light slanted through the window, catching the steam and turning it golden. "Couldn't sleep?" Mara asked. "Slept fine. Just woke up thinking about all this," June replied. She looked up, and there was an energy in her face Mara hadn't seen in years. "I brought down the first diary, the one from 1967. I thought we should start at the beginning of Uncle Teddy's part of the story." Mara poured herself a coffee and sat across from her sister. Together, they read Uncle Teddy's elegant script, his careful documentation of what he had inherited and what it meant. The entries painted a portrait of a young man. Teddy would have been about 30 in 1967, suddenly faced with an enormous responsibility. His father had died of a heart attack, and in his final days, he had told Teddy about the hidden room, about what it contained, about the promise their family had made nearly 30 years before. "Listen to this part," June said, reading aloud. "My father told me the gold and silver belonged to families who came here fleeing the old country. They needed help, a safe harbor, someone they could trust. Our family was chosen, along with 6 others. Each family agreed to guard what they were given until the rightful owners returned. My father said most of the families who left their valuables never came back. The war took them, or they built new lives elsewhere. But the promise remains. We keep the faith." "So, our great-grandfather was hiding this for refugees," Mara said. "And then he passed it to his son, and then to Uncle Teddy, and now to us." They read on. Uncle Teddy had tried, in those early years, to find the families who had left their property behind. He wrote letters to Jewish organizations, historical societies, and immigration authorities. Most never replied. Those that did had no records of the specific families he was asking about. The trail was decades cold, broken by war, displacement, and death. By 1970, according to the diary entries, Uncle Teddy began to accept that he might never find anyone to return the treasure to. But he held on, kept it safe, honored the promise his family had made, living simply in the cabin and guarding what was not his. "He never married," June said quietly. "Never had kids. Do you think it was because of this? Because he didn't want to burden anyone else with it, or risk someone finding out? It's a lonely way to live." "Maybe. Or maybe he found meaning in it, in keeping the promise." Mara thought about that as she refilled their coffee. Meaning and duty, in doing the right thing even if no one ever knew. She understood that better than she wanted to admit. Hadn't she spent years caring for their parents, for Tom in his final illness, for her children when they were small? Duty could be a burden, but it could also be a kind of purpose. They spent the rest of the morning going through the trunk of papers more systematically. The bundle of letters turned out to be correspondence between Uncle Teddy's father and several other men. A name, Samuel Weiss, appeared repeatedly. The letters were careful, coded in a way that suggested the writers didn't want anyone who intercepted them to understand what they were discussing. Safe harbor established, one letter read. The covenant holds. May we all stand firm. Another, dated 1943, stated, Samuel's family has arrived safely. All they carried is secure, per our agreement. They send their gratitude and prayers. And then there was a gap in the correspondence. The next letter was from 1946, and the tone was different. Brief, grief-stricken. The fire took them all, Samuel, his wife, their children. We keep the faith with the dead now. May their memory be a blessing. June's hands were trembling as she put the letter down. They died. The Weiss family, all of them. That's why no one came back for this. There was no one left to come back, Mara said. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that long-ago tragedy settling over them. People who had escaped one horror only to die in another. A family wiped out. Their legacy locked in a trunk beneath a mountain cabin. We need to know more, June said finally. We need to understand exactly what happened, who these people were. Maybe there are other descendants, cousins, distant relatives. How do we find out? We don't have any internet up here. Let's go into town, find a library, use their computers. Mara hesitated. Part of her wanted to hold this secret close for a little while longer, to keep it just between her and June. But June was right. They needed information. Okay. But we have to be careful about what we search for. We don't tell anyone what we've found. Agreed. They drove down the mountain in Mara's Honda, following the winding gravel road back to the pavement, and then on to the small town of Millbrook, which sat at the junction of two state highways and was the nearest thing to civilization for 50 miles. There was a post office, a diner, a gas station, a hardware store, and a library that was only open 3 days a week. Luckily, this was one of them. The librarian was a woman in her 60s with gray hair in a bun and reading glasses on a chain. She looked up from her desk as they entered, her expression friendly but curious. Can I help you find anything? We just need to use the computers, Mara said. For research? Sign-in sheets are over there. Computers are in the back. You get an hour unless no one else is waiting. They set themselves up at side-by-side computers in a corner where they could work without being overheard. June opened a genealogy website while Mara started searching historical newspaper archives. The coins they'd found were worth more than they'd imagined. American gold eagles from the 1930s and 40s, in mint condition, could be worth several thousand apiece. A conservative count from the photographs Mara had taken suggested there were at least 300 coins in the chests. That was nearly $1 million, possibly more depending on the exact condition and rarity. The silver was harder to value. Much of it was old, possibly antique, potentially valuable beyond its metal content. They would need an appraiser to know for sure. I found something, June said, turning her screen so Mara could see. Samuel Weiss, immigration records. Arrived in New York in 1938 from Vienna. Wife, Rachel. Children, David and Miriam. Sponsored by, she paused, her finger on the screen. Sponsored by Thomas Delaney. That was our great-grandfather. It has to be them. June clicked to another page. And here, a newspaper article from 1946. Millbrook House fire claims 4 lives. The Weiss family, recent refugees from Austria, perished when their home caught fire in the night. Cause of the fire undetermined. They read the article together. It was brief, just a few paragraphs. The kind of tragedy that made local news for a day and was then forgotten. But it told them what they needed to know. The family had been real. They had come here seeking safety and had died less than a decade after arriving. If there are any descendants, they'd have to be from other branches of the family, Mara said. Samuel or Rachel's siblings who didn't come to America, maybe? Or who went somewhere else? June was already searching, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She had always been good with computers, with finding information in unlikely places. Mara watched her work, remembering June as a teenager in the library, researching places she wanted to go, planning escapes. An hour passed, then another. The librarian didn't bother them. They found immigration manifests, census data, a few more mentions of the Weiss family in the papers, but no living descendants, no one who could lay claim to the treasure. Finally, June leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. There's a Holocaust memorial organization. They help survivors and descendants recover assets that were stolen or lost. We could contact them, couldn't we? I don't know. What if they say it has to go to the state or to some general fund? What if we lose any say in what happens to it? It was the first time either of them had mentioned the possibility of keeping any of it. The words hung in the air between them, a little shameful, a little necessary. Mara thought of her bank account, always hovering near empty, of working until she was too old to work, of the small, cramped rooms she lived in, of never being able to help her children the way she wanted, and of June, her brilliant, restless sister, who had spent her whole life just getting by, never settling, never feeling secure. Let's just keep researching on our own for now, Mara said. Let's give ourselves a week to really dig into this. Then we'll decide what to do. June nodded, visible relief on her face. A week. Okay. They ate lunch at the diner, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, food that tasted like childhood, and bought supplies at the hardware store. Batteries for the flashlights, propane for the camp stove, mousetraps, because June had heard scurrying in the walls at night. The man at the hardware store rang up their purchases. You're the ones who got Teddy Delaney's place, he said. We're his nieces, Mara said carefully. Teddy was a good man, kept to himself but a good man. Paid his bills, never caused trouble. Did you know him well? As well as anyone, I suppose. Which is to say, not much. He'd come in maybe once a month, buy what he needed and leave. Wasn't much for conversation. They drove back up the mountain with their supplies and their new knowledge. The cabin felt different now, not like a burden, but like one piece of a puzzle in a bigger picture they were only just beginning to see. That night, they sat together in the hidden room, the journals spread around them. Mara read while June took notes, and slowly, the story revealed itself. 7 families, 7 caches of valuables, 7 promises made and kept. Uncle Teddy's family was just one part of a network, a quiet conspiracy of kindness in a brutal time. I wish we'd known him better, June said. Really known him. Not just as the weird uncle who never visited. Me too. Mara, I'm sorry. For not being there when Mom died. For not helping more. Mara looked up, startled. No, let me say this, June said. I was scared. Scared of losing her. Scared of watching it happen. So I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. I tried to make plans that made no sense. And when you called me on it, I ran away. Because that's what I do, I run. I shouldn't have said what I said. You weren't being selfish. You were grieving. I was both. I was selfish, and I was grieving. And you were exhausted and grieving. We both were. They let that truth settle between them for a moment. Then Mara reached out and took June's hand. I missed you, Mara said, her voice soft. I missed you too. It wasn't a complete absolution. It wasn't a magical healing of 7 years of hurt. But it was a beginning. There, in the hidden room beneath their uncle's cabin, they were surrounded by proof that keeping faith, even when it was hard, even when it cost you everything, mattered. The fourth and fifth days at the cabin fell into a rhythm of research and discovery. Mara and June settled into an easy partnership, dividing tasks without the need for discussion. June handled the genealogical searches and historical records, her natural curiosity driving her deep into archives and databases. Mara organized their findings, creating timelines and family trees, her methodical nature bringing order to the chaos of information. They made daily trips to the library in Millbrook, arriving as it opened and staying until the librarian gently reminded them of closing time. Between these sessions, they studied the journals and letters in the hidden room, piecing together a story that was at once beautiful and heartbreaking. On the fourth day, June found the breakthrough they'd been hoping for. She was searching the Ellis Island records, cross-referencing names from the letters when a document appeared on her screen that made her catch her breath. Mara, look at this. The record showed a Samuel Weiss arriving in New York on August 3, 1938, aboard a ship called the Bremen. But it wasn't his name that caught June's eye. It was the notation in the sponsor column. Thomas Delaney, Millbrook, West Virginia, sponsored by the Miriam Davidovich Network. Miriam Davidovich? Mara read over her shoulder. Who's that? June was already typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. A moment later, she had an answer. She was part of an underground network that helped Jewish families escape Austria and Germany. She worked with Quakers and other groups to find American sponsors. She placed hundreds of families between 1936 and 1940. So, our great-grandfather was part of this network? Not just a part of it. Look. June pulled up another document, this one from a Holocaust memorial archive. The Davidovich Network focused on rural families, people who could offer a quiet refuge away from the cities. They specifically sought out people who were trustworthy and could keep a secret. The participating families agreed to help the refugees get settled and to safeguard any valuables they brought with them. Mara felt something shift inside her, a swell of pride she hadn't anticipated. Our great-grandfather was a hero. Yes, June whispered. He was. They printed what they could, aware of the librarian watching them with growing curiosity. On the drive back to the cabin, June was quiet, staring out the window at the passing mountains. What are you thinking? Mara asked. That we come from people who did brave things, June said. Important things. And I never knew. We never talked about it as a family. Maybe they couldn't, Mara mused. Maybe the secrecy was the whole point. Or maybe we just forgot, lost the story to time. Back at the cabin, they returned to the bundle of letters. With their newfound context, the coded language suddenly made sense. References to packages meant the arrival of families. Protected inventory meant valuables being hidden. The packed holds meant all 7 families were keeping their promises. One letter, dated 1943, stood out. It was longer than the others, written in a shaky hand that suggested age or illness. June read it aloud, while Mara sifted through the photographs from the trunk, trying to put faces to names. "My dear friend Thomas," the letter began, "I write to you as I prepare to meet my Maker. The doctors give me a few months at most. I have lived a full life and do not fear death, but I do fear failing those who put their trust in us. Samuel's family arrived safely, as you know, and are making a home here, despite all they have lost. They are good people, hard-working and kind. Samuel asks after the items he left in your care. I have told him they remain safe, that when the war is over and it is possible to retrieve such things, you will return them." He seemed comforted by this. "I pray I have not lied to him. I pray we all live to see the day when these families can reclaim what is theirs and build new lives without fear. Until then, we keep the faith. Your friend in this cause, Marcus Davidovich." "Marcus," Mara said. "Miriam's husband?" June searched her notes. "Brother. I think he was part of the network too. And Samuel Weiss knew his valuables were being kept safe. He trusted our great-grandfather." The weight of that trust settled over them. This wasn't just a forgotten, hidden treasure. It was a deliberately entrusted property, a sacred responsibility that had been passed down through generations. That night, they made dinner together. Pasta with sauce from a jar, garlic bread from the store, a simple salad. It was the first real meal they'd shared in 7 years. They ate at the small table after finding a second chair in the shed, and they talked about everything except the treasure. About June's various jobs, about Mara's children, about memories from their childhood. "Remember when we found that cave behind the waterfall?" June asked. "You must have been about 14. "I was 12, Mara corrected with a smile. "And we thought we'd discovered something incredible. Turns out half the kids in the county knew about it." "But it felt incredible," Mara said, "like we were explorers." "We were," June agreed, "in our own way." Later, as the sun set and a chill settled into the mountain air, they sat in the hidden room with the journals. June picked up one they hadn't yet examined, its leather cover cracked with age. The first entry was dated 1945. "This one is later than the others," June said, opening it carefully. The handwriting was their great-grandfather's, but the tone was different, heavier. "September 20th, 1945, June read. "The war in Europe is over. We thought this would be the time of return, when the families who left their treasures with us would come for them. But the news from across the ocean is darker than any of us imagined. Cities destroyed, populations scattered, or worse. Marcus writes that most of the families we helped have simply vanished. No records, no survivors. The weight of their absence is almost more than I can bear. What do we do with what they left behind? To whom do we return it? I have prayed for guidance, and I have received only silence." Mara felt tears well in her eyes. She had thought of the treasure as a windfall, a complication, a moral puzzle. But this journal entry reminded her it was something else entirely. It was grief made tangible, loss forged into gold coins and silver candlesticks. "Keep reading," she said softly. June continued. October 3rd, 1945. I met with the other 6 families today. All of us have held to our promise, waiting for word. 3 of the families wish to donate everything to Jewish relief organizations. 2 want to wait longer, in case someone returns. James Holloway and I believe we should establish a trust, something to help refugees, not just a few, but any who will need the same help we tried to give. We could not reach an agreement. The pact holds, but for how much longer? Holloway, Mara said, the name clicking into place. That name is familiar. June flipped through her notes. Grace Holloway. She was one of the names on the land deeds. Her family owned one of the properties marked on the map. So the Holloways were one of the 7 families, and they're apparently still around. Grace Holloway, June read from her phone. 847 Mountain View Road. It's not far from here. They looked at each other, the same thought passing between them. We should go see her, Mara said. She might know what happened to the other families. She might know what they decided to do. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the mountains shrouded in low-hanging clouds that made the world feel smaller, more intimate. They dressed carefully, as if for an important meeting. In a way, they were. They were going to meet someone who shared their story, who understood the weight of the promises their ancestors had made. The drive took 40 minutes, following narrow roads that snaked through hollows and over ridges. Mountain View Road was little more than a track, gravel giving way to mud in places. The house at the end of it was older than Uncle Teddy's cabin, a 2-story farmhouse with a tin roof and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Smoke curled from the chimney. An old pickup truck sat in the drive, its bed filled with firewood. As they pulled to a stop, the front door opened and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was old, likely in her 80s, but she moved with the sure-footedness of someone who had lived on this land her entire life. Her white hair was in a single braid down her back. She wore a flannel shirt over worn jeans and work boots that had seen decades of use. "Can I help you?" she called, her voice carrying easily across the yard. Mara and June got out of the car. Mara spoke first. "Grace Holloway?" "That's me. And you are?" "I'm Mara Delaney. This is my sister, June. Our uncle was Theodore Delaney. He passed away recently, and he left us his cabin." Grace's expression shifted. "You're Tom Delaney's granddaughters." "Great-granddaughters." "Right." Grace studied them for a long moment, her eyes sharp and assessing. Then she gave a slow, decisive nod. "You'd better come inside. We have things to discuss." The interior of the house was cozy and cluttered, the way homes get when they have accumulated a lifetime of living. Photographs covered every surface. Quilts were draped over the furniture, and the air smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Grace led them to a worn kitchen table and gestured for them to sit. "Coffee?" "Yes, thank you," Mara said. Grace poured 3 mugs from a percolator on the stove and sat across from them. She wrapped her hands around her mug and fixed them with a steady gaze. "Your uncle and I had an understanding," she said, without preamble. "We were the last ones left, the last keepers of the pact. I've been wondering what would happen when he passed, wondering if he'd told anyone what he was protecting." "He didn't tell us directly," June said, "but he left clues. We found the hidden room. We know about the 7 families, about the refugees. We're trying to figure out what we're supposed to do now." Grace took a long sip of her coffee, her eyes distant. My father was part of it. He told me when I was 16, made me promise to keep the secret. He said someday I would be the keeper, and I needed to be ready. We had a room just like your uncle's, hidden under the barn. We kept it for 40 years after the war, waiting for someone to claim what was inside. What happened? Mara asked. About 20 years ago, someone did. A woman from New York, the granddaughter of one of the families we'd helped. She'd been searching for years. When she found us, she just wept. We gave her everything. Gold, jewelry, photographs, everything. She tried to pay us, but we wouldn't take it. That wasn't the point. Did the other families do the same? June asked. Grace shook her head slowly. Most sold their land and moved away after the war. I don't know what became of what they were holding. Two of the families donated everything to Jewish charities back in the 50s. As for the others, she shrugged. Promises get lost to time. People die. The children don't know. The memory fades. But we kept the faith, and your uncle kept the faith. We used to talk about it, him and me, especially these last few years. We were getting old, and we worried. Worried about what would happen to the promises we made. Mara felt a tightness in her chest. Did he know he was dying? He had a bad heart, Grace said. Wouldn't see a doctor. Didn't trust them. But yes, I think he knew his time was short. That's why. She paused, looking at them intently. That's why he made sure the cabin went to you too. He told me about you. Told me how you'd stopped speaking. He said if anything could bring you back together, it would be finding what he'd hidden. He said you'd need each other to figure out what to do with it. June's eyes glistened with tears. He planned it, she breathed. He planned all of it. Teddy was clever that way. Quiet, but clever. He knew the treasure wasn't just gold and silver. It was the responsibility, the choice. And he knew you couldn't make that choice alone. You had to make it together. They sat in Grace's cozy kitchen, the understanding settling over them as softly as falling snow. Uncle Teddy hadn't just left them an estate. He had left them a test, a gift, and a bridge back to each other, all wrapped up in a hidden room beneath a mountain cabin. Mrs. Hawley, Mara said finally, what do you think we should do? Grace smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. It's not my place to say, but I'll tell you what my father told me. The promise wasn't just to keep things safe. It was to use them for good if no one ever came to claim them. To honor the people who trusted us by helping others, just as they were helped. How you decide to do that? Well, that's between you, your conscience, and the memory of those who came before. She stood and went to a cupboard, pulling out a metal box. This might help. My father's papers, letters, records, photographs. Everything he kept about the network and the families we helped. Your uncle should have had this. But he was too stubborn to ask. Take it. Learn the whole story and then decide. June accepted the box with reverent hands. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep the faith. As they drove down the mountain, the metal box secured on the back seat, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but something close to it. A sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she needed to do. And beside her, June was silent, but it was a comfortable silence. the silence of two people who had found their way back to being sisters. The sixth day began with a knock on the cabin door that startled both sisters over their morning coffee. They exchanged a look. No one knew they were here except the lawyer, and he had no reason to visit. June crept to the window and peeked out. "An older man," she whispered. "70s, maybe. Driving a Subaru." Mara joined her at the window. The man standing on their porch was holding car keys and wearing a button-down shirt, a pair of reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. He looked harmless, but something about the situation felt off. They hadn't told anyone in town about their plans or how long they were staying. "Should we answer it?" June asked. Before Mara could reply, the man called out, "Hello in there? I'm looking for the Delaney sisters. My name is Martin Grady. I knew your uncle." June opened the door a crack, keeping her body in the doorway. "Can we help you?" Up close, Martin Grady had a friendly face, weathered by sun and time, but open and warm. He offered an apologetic smile. "I hope I'm not intruding. I live about 5 miles down the valley. I'm the local historian. Amateur, really. Just someone who cares about preserving the area's stories. I heard Theodore's nieces were in town to settle the estate, and I wanted to introduce myself. Your uncle and I had some interesting talks over the years." "Talks about what?" Mara asked, moving to stand beside June. "Local history, mostly. The old families that settled these mountains. Your uncle knew more than most about the region's past." He paused, seeming to notice their wariness. "I'm sorry. I should have called first, but there's no phone up here. I brought a few things I thought you might like. Photographs of Teddy at town events, some newspaper clippings about the Delaney family from the 30s and 40s. He held up a cardboard folio, and despite their caution, the sisters were intrigued. June stepped back to let him in. Inside, Martin sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder. As promised, it contained old photos. Uncle Teddy at what looked like a 4th of July church social, standing with other men outside the hardware store. In every picture, he was in the background, never quite the center of attention, as if he'd been caught by accident while the photographer was aiming for someone else. Your uncle was a private man, Martin told them. But he was a part of this community in his own quiet way. These are from the 60s. I've been documenting local history for 40 years, and Teddy shows up in maybe a dozen of my photos, always on the fringe. June picked up a photo, studying her uncle's younger face. Did you know him well? As well as anyone did, which isn't saying much. We'd chat sometimes when he came into town. He was interested in the history of the refugee families that passed through this area before and during the Second World War. Said his father had mentioned something about it once. Mara's stomach tightened. Refugee families? Yes. Few people know about it now, but this area was part of a quiet network that helped Jewish families escape Europe. Rural communities like this could offer safety away from the cities, away from scrutiny. Several families settled here in the late 1930s. Most eventually moved on to bigger cities or other states, but for a while this valley was a sanctuary. He spoke casually, as if discussing common history, but the sisters were acutely aware of the hidden room beneath their feet, of the treasure that represented the very thing Martin was describing. That's fascinating, June said carefully. Do you know which families were involved in helping them? Some of the records are spotty. A lot of it was deliberately kept off the books, but the Holloway family certainly. They were very active in the settlement efforts. And I believe the Delaneys were involved too, though Teddy would never confirm it. He'd just smile and change the subject. Martin produced more photographs, these older, from the 1930s and 40s. One showed a group of men in front of what might have been a church. This is from 1938. On the left is Thomas Delaney, your great-grandfather, and next to him is James Holloway. They were friends from what I understand. Both Quakers, both committed to helping people in need. Were there others? Mara asked. Other families involved? 7 families in total, from what I've been able to piece together. But most of them moved away or their children sold off the land. The Holloways and the Delaneys were the only ones who stayed in the area for multiple generations. He continued to talk, sharing stories and showing photographs, and Mara felt increasingly uneasy. How much did Martin know? Was this friendly visit just curiosity, or was he fishing for information? Finally, after what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, Martin gathered his papers and stood. Well, I've taken up enough of your time. I just wanted to introduce myself and share these with you. If you're planning on selling the cabin, I hope you'll let me know. I'd be interested in documenting it before it's gone. These old places hold so much history. We'll keep that in mind, June said, walking him to the door. And if you come across anything interesting while you're sorting through Teddy's things, papers, photographs, anything related to the old days, I'd love to see it. For the Historical Society, you understand. We're trying to preserve as much as we can. After he left, Mara and June stood at the window and watched his Subaru wind its way down the driveway. Neither of them spoke until the sound of the engine had faded completely. That was no coincidence, Mara said. No, June agreed. He was looking for something. How much do you think he knows? June shook her head. I don't know. But we need to be more careful. If he's asking questions, others might be too. They spent the rest of the morning poring over the box of papers from Grace Holloway with a renewed sense of urgency. The documents painted a fuller picture of the network. Formal agreements between the 7 families, lists of the refugees who had been sheltered, records of valuables entrusted to each family's care. One document in particular caught Mara's eye. It was a hand-drawn map, the paper yellowed and brittle with age, showing the properties of the 7 families. Each was marked with an X and an annotation. The Delaney property, Uncle Teddy's cabin, was marked Safe Keep. The Holloway property was marked similarly, but the other 5 had different notes. Family relocated 1952, sold 1968, status unknown. Look at this, Mara said, showing the map to June. If the other families left or sold their properties, what happened to what they were holding? Maybe they took it with them or donated it, like Grace said some did. Or maybe it's still there. Hidden in houses or barns or cellars, forgotten or waiting. June traced the locations on the map. This one is where the state park is now, and this one is under a housing development, I think. But this property, she pointed to one marked with an X and the note, Family Relocated 1952. It looks like it's still private land, about 30 miles from here. We should check it out, don't you think? If there are other collections like ours, other families who might have descendants looking for them, shouldn't we try to find out? Mara wanted to say no. She wanted to focus on their own situation, their own moral dilemma. But June was right. If they were going to honor the pact, they needed to understand its full scope. Let's research the property first, she said. Find out who owns it now. Then we'll decide. That afternoon, they drove back to the library in Millbrook. The librarian greeted them like old friends. They had been in almost every day for a week. More genealogical research? She asked. Property records this time, June said. The property marked on the old map had belonged to a family named Morrison. According to county records, the land had been sold in 1952 to a developer and then resold several times over the decades. It was currently owned by a man named Robert Chen, who had purchased it 3 years ago. A dead end, Mara said. If there was anything hidden there, it's long gone by now. But June kept digging, pulling up satellite images of the property. Look, there's the original farmhouse, or what's left of it. And that's a barn. They're still standing. If Morrison hid something like our great-grandfather did, maybe it's still there. We can't just trespass on someone's land. No, but we can ask. Say we're researching family history, which is true. See if they'll let us have a look around. Mara studied the satellite image, the old structures being slowly reclaimed by the forest. Part of her wanted to let it go, to focus on solving their own mystery. But another part, the part that had been waking up for the past week, was curious, wanting to follow the thread wherever it led. Okay, she said. We'll try to contact the owner, but we do it carefully. That night, back at the cabin, they drafted an email to Robert Chen. They kept it vague. Two sisters researching their family history, who understood his property once belonged to a family connected to theirs. They hoped to visit and perhaps photograph the old buildings, if he was amenable. June sent it from her phone, using the library's Wi-Fi before they'd left town. They made dinner together. This time they cooked a real meal, roasted chicken and vegetables in the oven, rice on the stove. The cabin was beginning to feel less like a temporary stop and more like a home. They cleaned, organized Uncle Teddy's remaining belongings, and made the space their own. After dinner, they sat on the porch, enjoying the cool night air. The mountains were a deep purple against a sky fading from blue to indigo, the stars beginning to appear one by one. I've been thinking, June said, about what we do if we can't find any descendants. If the Weiss family is truly gone and there's no one to return this to. Grace said we should use it for good, to help others, the way our great-grandfather helped people. Right. But what does that look like specifically? Mara asked. Do we donate it all to charity? Set up some kind of foundation? Do we keep any for ourselves? It was the question they had been avoiding, the elephant on the porch between them. The treasure was worth enough to change both of their lives. Mara could pay off her debts, help her kids, maybe even retire from the endless cycle of just getting by. June could finally stop running, put down roots, and have security for the first time in her adult life. I don't think there is a right answer, Mara said slowly. I think Uncle Teddy left it to us precisely because there is no single right answer. Just choices we have to make and live with. That's not very comforting. No, but it's honest. June pulled her sweater tighter against the chill. What if we split it 3 ways? A third for organizations that help refugees today, a third for us to share, and a third to start a fund that can keep growing, that we can use to help people in the future, to keep the pact in a new way. Mara considered it. It felt right. Not taking it all, not giving it all away, but trying to honor both the history and their own needs. I think that could work, she said. But first, we have to be sure. We have to be absolutely sure there are no descendants left. That's still the priority, Mara agreed. They sat in silence on the porch for a time, listening to the nocturnal symphony of the mountain. An owl hooted somewhere in the deep pines. Small animals rustled in the undergrowth. The wind soughed through the tall trees, a sound like a distant ocean. "Mara," June said, her voice soft. "What for?" "For giving us another chance. For not just selling the cabin and walking away. I think we both needed this. We needed to find our way back to each other." "Yeah," Mara said. "I think Uncle Teddy knew that." Inside the cabin, in its hidden room, the treasure waited. But out here on the porch, the two sisters had already found something far more valuable. The possibility of healing, of a family restored, of promises kept not only to the dead, but to the living. Tomorrow, they would continue their search for answers. But tonight, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The seventh and eighth days brought both progress and a new, creeping tension. Robert Chan replied to their email on the morning of the seventh day, a friendly message saying he would be happy to let them visit the property. He was a software engineer who'd bought the old Morrison place as a weekend refuge and was, himself, curious about its history. They arranged to meet him there the following afternoon. But that same morning brought something else, something that shattered the quiet atmosphere in the cabin. When Mara stepped outside to gather kindling, she found a business card wedged into the doorframe where they couldn't possibly miss it. Simple white cardstock, black letters. R.J. Palmer, Private Investigations. On the back, a handwritten scrawl in ink. "We should talk about what you found. Call me." Her hand trembled slightly as she carried it inside to June. "Someone's been watching us." June studied the card, her expression grim. "A private investigator? Who would hire someone to watch us?" "I don't know. But they know we found something." They spent an hour scouring the perimeter of the cabin, searching for any sign of surveillance or intrusion. They found nothing obvious, but the damage was done. The cabin no longer felt like a sanctuary. Every snap of a twig in the forest made them jump. Every car that rumbled up the drive sent their hearts racing. "Should we call him?" June asked, holding the card between her fingers. "Find out what he wants? Or should we call the police? This feels like intimidation." "And tell them what? That someone left a business card? They'll think we're paranoid." Mara knew she was right, but the idea of calling Palmer sent a chill down her spine. Still, not knowing was worse. "All right. But put it on speaker. I want to hear every word." June dialed from her cell phone. After 3 rings, a man answered. His voice was gravelly, the rasp of a heavy smoker, but laced with a smooth professionalism. "Palmer. This is June Delaney. You left your card at my uncle's cabin." "Mrs. Delaney, thanks for calling. I'd like to talk about the property you've inherited and what might be on it." "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. Your uncle was holding on to something valuable, something that doesn't belong to your family. My client has a legitimate interest in recovering it." "Who's your client?" "That's confidential, but I can tell you they have documentation to prove their claim. Historical records, family papers, proof of ownership. We'd like to resolve this amicably." June's jaw tightened. "There's nothing to resolve. Everything in that cabin belongs to us. We inherited it, legally. Legal ownership gets complicated when the original property was obtained under questionable circumstances. Look, I'm not trying to make trouble. I'm just saying there's a conversation to be had. Why don't we meet tomorrow, somewhere public? I'll show you what I've got. You show me what you've found, and we'll see if there's a reasonable way forward." "We're not showing you anything." "Then it gets complicated. My client is prepared to file a lawsuit, contest the inheritance, lay claim to the contents of the property. That gets expensive for everyone and takes years. Or we talk, we come to an arrangement, and everyone walks away happy. Mara grabbed a pen and paper, scrawling, "Who told him?" and shoved it in front of June. June nodded. "How did you know we found anything? We haven't told a soul." There was a pause. "Small towns, Mrs. Delaney. People talk. Your uncle's cabin has been the subject of speculation for years. When his nieces show up and start spending time there, start digging into local history at the library, asking questions about old families and refugees, well, people notice. People get curious." "Martin Grady," June said flatly. "I didn't say that. Look, meet me tomorrow, 3 o'clock at the diner in Millbrook. If you decide you don't want to work with me after you hear what I have to say, that's fine. But at least hear me out." June glanced at Mara, who was shaking her head emphatically. But June surprised her. "Fine, 3 o'clock, but we're not agreeing to anything. That's all I ask. See you tomorrow." June ended the call and Mara immediately exploded. "Are you crazy? Why would you agree to meet him? He's trying to intimidate us." "I know, but I want to see what he has. What documentation, what proof? If he's bluffing, we need to know. And if he's not, well, we need to know that too. Maybe it's a mistake, but sitting here being scared is worse." They spent the rest of the day poring over Grace Hawley's papers, looking for anything that might counter the claim. They found letters establishing the pact between the 7 families, records of what was entrusted to each, but nothing about original ownership. Neither of them could eat much for dinner. Instead, they sat in the hidden room, surrounded by the treasure, which was quickly becoming more of a burden than a blessing. "What if he's right?" June said quietly into the stillness. "What if there are descendants out there with a legitimate claim? Then we give it back. That's what we've been trying to do all along. But what if they're not legitimate? What if this is just someone trying to steal it?" Mara picked up one of the gold coins, feeling its heavy, solid weight in her palm. "Then we fight. We have documentation, too. We have the pact, the letters, Grace's testimony. We're not helpless." "No," June agreed. "We're not." The 8th day dawned gray and threatening rain. They drove to the Morrison property first, meeting Robert Chan at noon. He was younger than they'd expected, maybe 40, with an easy smile and a genuine enthusiasm for the old buildings on his land. "Haven't done much with them yet," he said, leading them across an overgrown field toward a leaning barn. "The house needs a ton of work, and I'm not sure the barn is salvageable, but I'd hate to tear it down. They've been here since the 1920s. "Do you know anything about the Morrison family?" Mara asked. "Not much. They farmed here till the early 50s, then moved to Pennsylvania, I think. The land changed hands a few times after that. I bought it 3 years ago from a developer who gave up on turning it into a subdivision." The barn was a skeletal structure, its roof caving in, its walls weathered to a brittle silver gray. But it was still standing, still recognizable. June walked the perimeter, studying the foundation, looking for irregularities. "Would you mind if we took a look inside?" she asked. "Be my guest. Just be careful. The flooring's not stable in places." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old hay, bird droppings, and damp decay. Light streamed through the gaps in the walls. Most of the interior had been cleared out over the years, anything of value long since removed. But June wasn't looking for the obvious. She was looking for hidden spaces, the kind her great-grandfather had built. She found it in the northwest corner, where the floor met the foundation wall. A section of floorboards that didn't quite match the others. Newer wood, stained to look old. She knelt, running her fingers along the seam. "Mara, give me a hand with this." Together, they pried the boards up. Beneath was a space about 3 feet square and 2 feet deep. It was empty, save for a few dust-covered glass jars and a folded piece of paper. June carefully unfolded it. It was a handwritten note in faded ink. August 1978. After much prayer and discussion, we have decided to donate all that was entrusted to our family to the Jewish Relief Fund. May this aid those in need, just as we once aided those who came to us. The pact is fulfilled. Michael Morrison. They already gave it away, Mara breathed. 30 years ago. June sat back on her heels, a strange sense of relief washing over her. So there's nothing to find here. Nothing but confirmation that at least one family did the right thing. They showed the note to Robert Chan, explaining what they were looking for. He listened with growing fascination and asked if he could keep the note for his own property records. They agreed, and he took pictures of the hiding spot before they covered it back up. "History everywhere," he said, shaking his head. "Even in an old barn you think is just an old barn." They thanked him and left, driving straight to Millbrook for their 3 o'clock meeting with Palmer. The diner was busy with the late lunch crowd. They spotted Palmer immediately, a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit that looked as out of place as a hawk in a chicken coop. He was sitting in a booth at the back with another younger man, also in a suit. "Mrs. Delaney! Ms. Delaney!" Palmer stood as they approached, extending a hand. Neither sister took it. "This is my associate, Leonard Briggs. He's an attorney." "I didn't agree to meet with a lawyer," June said, her voice flat. "He's just here to answer any legal questions that might arise. Please sit." They sat reluctantly, a knot of tension tightening in both their stomachs. Palmer slid a folder across the table. "This is what my client has. Property records showing the cabin was built on land that originally belonged to the Morrison family, not the Delaneys. A deed suggesting your great-grandfather was merely a caretaker, not an owner. Proof that anything found on the property should revert to the Morrison heirs." Mara opened the folder. The documents looked official, but something felt wrong. The dates didn't align with what she knew of the property's history. The deed looked too new, too clean, for something supposedly from the 1930s. "This is a fake," she said, her voice firm. "I've seen the original deed at the county clerk's office. The cabin was built by my great-grandfather on land his father bought in 1910. This," she tapped the paper, "is either a forgery or a deliberate misrepresentation." Palmer's expression didn't flicker. "My client is prepared to pursue this in court. It will be expensive and time-consuming for you. Or we can reach an agreement now. They'll accept 20% of whatever is in the cabin. You keep the rest. Everyone walks away happy." "So this is extortion," June said. "This is business. You found something valuable. Multiple parties have claims. We're trying to resolve it efficiently." The lawyer, Briggs, spoke for the first time. "You should consider the offer carefully. Even if you win in court, which is far from certain, the legal fees alone could consume most of the value." Mara looked at June and saw the same cold fire she felt burning in her own gut. They had spent 7 days trying to do the right thing, to honor their uncle's legacy and the pact their family had made. And now, someone was trying to steal it from them with fake documents and veiled threats. "No," Mara said, pushing her chair back and standing. "We won't be negotiating. And if you file a suit, we will fight it. We have the real documentation. We have the real history. We have witnesses who knew my uncle and can testify to the truth. Whatever you think you have, it won't stand up." Palmer's affable mask dropped. "You're making a mistake. My client doesn't give up easily." "Neither do we," June said, rising to stand beside her sister. "Come on, Mara, we're done here." They walked out of the diner and into the afternoon rain that had begun to fall while they were inside. Neither spoke until they were in the car. Doors locked, engine running. "Well, that went well," June said with a bitter laugh. "He's bluffing. He has to be. Those documents had to be fakes, but he could still make trouble. File frivolous lawsuits, tie them up in court for years." Mara gripped the steering wheel. "We need help," she said. "Real legal help. And we need to move faster to find the truth about the Weiss family. If there are real descendants, we give it all to them and this whole mess goes away." "Agreed. I'll call that lawyer friend of mine in Asheville." And we double down on the genealogy research. As they drove up the mountain through the rain, the two sisters felt the full weight of what they had stepped into. This was no longer just a family mystery. It was a fight. But fighting was something the Delaney women knew how to do. They had done it their whole lives. Fought poverty, fought circumstance, fought their own stubborn pride. This was just one more battle. It was just another battle. But this time, they were fighting it together. The 9th day began with a purpose. June's friend, a lawyer named Patricia Chan, who specialized in estate law, had agreed to drive up from Asheville that afternoon. In the meantime, the sisters worked methodically through the documents they had, building their case, documenting the chain of custody from 1938 to the present day. But it was in the quiet of mid-morning, as Mara was organizing the third trunk for the 100th time, that she noticed something strange. She was arranging the bundles of letters chronologically, checking the dates, when her hand brushed the bottom of the trunk and felt something that didn't belong. A ridge. A seam where no seam should be. "June," she called out. "Come see this." June came down to the hidden room, where Mara was already pulling everything out of the trunk. With it empty, the irregularity was obvious. The bottom was far too shallow compared to the trunk's external depth. "A false bottom," June whispered. They worked with painstaking care, feeling along the edges until they found the mechanism, a small wooden peg that, when pressed, released a catch. The false bottom lifted, revealing a space about 4 inches deep that ran the full length of the trunk. Inside lay a single wax-sealed envelope, the wax cracked with age. On the front, in Uncle Teddy's distinctive hand, were the words, "To whomever may find this." Mara's hands trembled as she picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind used for important documents. She carefully broke the seal and drew out several sheets of paper folded together. "It's a letter," she said, "from Uncle Teddy." June moved closer, and together they read. "My dearest nieces," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then you have found what I spent my life protecting, and you have found each other again. I pray the latter proves more important than the former." Mara felt tears welling in her eyes. Even in death, even in a letter written months or years before they would ever arrive, Uncle Teddy knew them better than they knew themselves. "I should have told you all this while I was alive," the letter continued. "I should have brought you here, shown you the secret room, explained the pact our family made. But I was a coward. I lived with this secret for so long it became a part of me, and I couldn't imagine sharing it with anyone, not even family, especially not family. He went on to explain the whole story, how his father had told him on his deathbed about the Davidovich network, about the 7 families who agreed to help, about the specific family assigned to the Delaneys, the Weiss family, Samuel, Rachel, and their 2 children, David and Miriam. They arrived in 1938 with what they could carry, Uncle Teddy wrote. Gold coins sewn into the lining of their coats, jewelry hidden in the heels of their shoes, small valuables that represented everything they had managed to save from their old life. My father told me Samuel wept when he handed it all over. Not because he didn't trust us, but because giving it away made real what he had been trying to deny, that he could never go home again, that his home was gone. The letter described how the Weiss family had settled in Millbrook, how Samuel had found work as a tailor, how the children had started school. For a few years, it seemed they might build a new life. And then came the fire. In February of 1946, their house burned to the ground in the middle of the night. The official report said a kerosene heater had malfunctioned, but there were rumors. The war was over, but the hatred was not. There were people in town who didn't want the refugee families there. They saw them as outsiders, as other. I don't know if the fire was an accident or something worse. My father didn't know either, but the result was the same. The Weiss family was gone. Mara had to stop reading, her throat thick with emotion. June's hand found hers and squeezed. The letter continued. I spent years trying to find other members of the Weiss family, cousins, siblings, anyone who might have survived and deserved to know that Samuel's savings were safe. I wrote to every organization I could find. I searched records, followed leads, spent money I didn't have on private investigators, all to no avail. As far as I could determine, Samuel and Rachel's entire extended family was killed in the Holocaust. They were the only ones who made it out. And then they died here, in the one place that was supposed to be safe. Uncle Teddy described how that discovery had broken him, how he had retreated from the world, unable to stomach its cruelty, how he had lived alone with the treasure and the guilt, feeling like the gravedigger for a family, with no one left to mourn them. But then I got sick, the letter went on. The doctor said my heart was failing. Fitting, I suppose, since I've spent decades feeling as though my heart was already broken. And as I faced death, I realized something. The treasure wasn't meant to stay buried forever. It was meant to be used, to do good in the world, to honor the memory of those who died. It was here that the letter took a turn neither sister expected. I never married because I was afraid, Uncle Teddy wrote. Afraid that if I had a family, I would place this burden on them. Afraid I would fail them, the way I felt I had failed the Weiss family. But in doing so, I pushed away the 2 people who could have helped me carry that weight. You, Mara, and you, June. I watched you from a distance over the years. I saw you grow up, make your own choices, build your own lives. And I saw you drift apart. I saw the distance between you grow until you weren't even speaking. It reminded me of myself, the letter continued, of how I walled myself off from connection, from help, from love, because I was carrying something I thought I had to carry alone. And I realized that the greatest tragedy wasn't the treasure, or even the loss of the Weiss family. It was the loneliness, the unnecessary, self-imposed loneliness that defined my life. Mara was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. June's eyes were red and wet. So I made a decision, Uncle Teddy wrote. I am leaving the cabin and everything in it to both of you, not just to split the property or the money, but to give you a reason to come together again. to give you a common purpose, a shared responsibility that would require you to talk to one another, to work together, to remember that you are sisters. The treasure is real and it is substantial, but it is not the inheritance I am truly leaving you. What I am leaving you is a choice, the choice I never made. You can carry this burden alone, each taking your share and returning to your separate lives. Or you can carry it together. You can use it not just for yourselves, but for something greater. You can honor the memory of the Weiss family and all those like them by helping others who need refuge, who need safety, who need someone to keep faith for them. The letter concluded, I know you will do the right thing, not because you are saints, but because you are Delaneys, and Delaneys keep their promises. But more than that, I know you will find your way back to each other. You will remember that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up. It's about doing the hard work of forgiveness and connection, even when it would be easier to walk away. I love you both. I'm sorry I never said it while I was alive, but maybe this letter, this inheritance, this whole complicated mess I'm leaving you, maybe this is my way of saying it now. Take care of each other. That is the real treasure. It was signed simply, Uncle Teddy. For a long moment, neither sister could speak. They sat on the floor of the hidden room, the letter resting between them. 50 years of loneliness and regret, and love condensed onto a few sheets of paper. He did this on purpose, June finally whispered. All of it. Leaving it to both of us. Hiding this letter. Knowing we'd have to work together to figure it out. He was trying to save us from becoming like him, Mara said. From spending our lives alone, carrying burdens we were meant to share. June picked up the letter and read the last paragraph again. He's right, you know, about the choice, about what the real inheritance is. They made their way back to the main room just as they heard a car coming up the drive. Patricia Chan, the lawyer, arrived carrying a briefcase and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded Mara of June at her most confident. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and streaks of gray in her dark hair that she made no attempt to hide. They showed her everything: the hidden room, the treasure, the journals, Grace Hawley's documents, and Uncle Teddy's letter. She listened intently, took notes, photographed documents, and asked precise questions. This Palmer fellow is running a scam, she said at last. The documents he's shown you are either forgeries or deliberately misleading. Your inheritance is legally sound. I'll double-check with the county clerk, but from what you've told me, there's no question the property and its contents belong to you. So he can't take it? June asked. He can file a lawsuit, but it will go nowhere. It might cost you some legal fees to defend, but I can handle that for a reasonable rate. The more interesting question is the moral one: whether there are any legitimate heirs to the Weiss family fortune. Uncle Teddy couldn't find any, Mara said. And neither could we. Then, legally and morally, after a good faith effort to locate descendants, the estate is yours to do with as you see fit. The fact that your great-grandfather was entrusted with it, that your family kept the faith for 3 generations, gives you not only legal standing, but moral authority. Patricia packed up her briefcase. I'll do some more digging on my end, verify everything. Prepare a response for Palmer, should he follow through on his threats. But honestly, I think once he realizes you have a lawyer and the documentation to back you up, he'll fold. Guys like that usually do. After she left, the sisters sat on the porch in the late afternoon sun. The letter lay on the table between them, its words still echoing in the quiet air. So, what do we do? June asked. Mara thought of Uncle Teddy, of a life spent in isolation and regret. She thought of her own life, of the years of bitterness and exhaustion, of June's relentless drive, always searching for something she couldn't name. We do what he asked, Mara said. We use it for something bigger. We start a foundation. We help refugees. We honor the pact in a new way. And we keep enough to change our own lives, to give ourselves the security and peace we never had. We do both, and we do it together. Together, June repeated. She reached her hand across the table for Mara's. This time, when their fingers interlaced, it felt natural, easy, like coming home. Inside the cabin, in its hidden room, the treasure waited. But out here, in the golden light of the fading day, the real treasure had already been found. Two sisters, given a second chance by an uncle who never got one. Two sisters who chose connection over isolation, who chose to honor not just the dead, but the living. Uncle Teddy's last gift was complete. The 10th day began with a phone call that changed everything. Mara's phone buzzed just after dawn, waking them both. She fumbled for it in the dim light and saw Patricia Chan's name on the screen. "Sorry to call so early," Patricia said without preamble, "but I thought you should know immediately. Palmer filed a lawsuit late yesterday. He's claiming the contents of the cabin belong to his client, whom he's now named as one Gregory Morrison, a supposed descendant of the Morrison family." Mara put the phone on speaker so June could hear. "But the Morrison family donated their collection in 1978. We saw the deed of gift. He's claiming it was unauthorized, that Michael Morrison had no authority to donate family assets. It's nonsense, but it will require a response. More importantly, he's filed for a temporary restraining order to prevent you from removing or selling anything from the property pending the outcome of the case." "Can he do that?" June demanded. "A judge will hear arguments this afternoon. I'll be there to oppose it, but I wanted you to know what was happening. There's something else, too. I did a little digging into Palmer. He's been involved in several similar cases. He targets people who've inherited valuable collections, claims his clients have competing ownership rights, and pushes for a percentage. It's basically legal extortion." "So this is what he does," Mara said. "It's what he does, and he's good at it because most people don't want the fight, the expense, the hassle. They settle. But here's the kicker. In every case I could find, when someone actually fought back with good documentation, Palmer's lawsuits fell apart. His clients turn out to be distant relatives with flimsy claims, or sometimes not even real people at all. I have a hunch Gregory Morrison might be a work of fiction." After the call ended, the sisters sat at the kitchen table with their coffee, trying to process the information. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a target. "We need to protect everything," June said, her voice firm. "Photograph every item, document the exact locations, create a complete inventory. If this is going to court, we need proof of what's here." They spent the morning doing just that. Mara took the photographs while June cataloged, writing detailed descriptions of every coin, every piece of silver, every document. They worked methodically, each entry a careful act of preservation, aware that their documentation might one day become evidence. By midday, they were finished. The tally was staggering. 347 gold coins of various denominations, 112 pieces of silver, serving sets, candlesticks, and jewelry. 23 journals, their entries spanning from 1938 to the year of Uncle Teddy's death. 47 bundles of letters and 3 boxes of photographs. The final inventory ran 12 pages, written in a small, meticulous hand. "We need to make copies," Mara said, her voice low. "Keep them somewhere off-site, just in case something happens to this place." June nodded, her expression grim. "I'll head into town. Use the library's scanner and email everything to myself, multiple backups." "And I'll stay," Mara replied. "Keep watch." After June's car disappeared down the gravel drive, Mara was truly alone in the cabin for the first time since they'd arrived. The silence that settled in June's absence was of a different quality. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. She moved through the rooms, a slow patrol, checking the latches on the windows and confirming the deadbolts on the doors. She felt foolish, paranoid even, but Patricia's warning echoed in her mind. Palmer is persistent. He might try something. She stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the driveway, when a flicker of movement in the trees caught her eye. It was just a flash, there and gone. Probably an animal, she told herself. A deer or maybe a bear. But a frantic rhythm hammered against her ribs. Then she saw it again. Unmistakable this time. The shape of a person moving through the forest that ran parallel to the cabin. Someone was out there. Watching. Mara fumbled for her phone, but of course there was no signal. She was alone, isolated, and someone was circling the property. Her first instinct was to get in the car and drive, find June in town. But what if that was exactly what they wanted? For her to leave the cabin unprotected, for them to move in. She retreated to the center of the cabin, a vantage point from which she could see every window, and waited. The minutes stretched, thick and slow. The forest remained unnervingly still. Had she imagined it all? Was fear simply conjuring phantoms in the trees? Then a sharp knock on the door made her jump so violently she nearly dropped her phone. "Mrs. Delaney?" A woman's voice called out. "Sorry to startle you. My name is Sarah Goldman. I'm a reporter with the Appalachian Historical Society." Mara approached the door cautiously, peering through the small window beside it. A woman in her 30s stood on the porch, holding a reporter's notebook. She looked professional, harmless, but Mara kept the door bolted. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice tight. "I heard about the treasure found in Theodore Delaney's cabin. I'm writing a feature on the Vidovich network and the families who took part. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions." "How did you hear about any of this?" "Martin Grady contacted our society. He thought we'd be interested in the historical significance." Of course, Martin Grady, the local historian who had been so intensely curious about their find. He was the one who had let it slip, whether intentionally or not. "I'm not interested,"